everybody. Welcome back to Fan2Fan. Again, I'm your host, Doug. We've got Bernie, our guest host, Andrew, and he's come back on the RV. He's sticking around to continue this road trip of horror with us. We brought our host, Pete, back. So we are going to continue throughout the United States on our road trip of horror. We're all crammed in the RV. I'm not going to lie. It's getting a little stinky in here, but we're going to fight through this. What we're doing is we just ended with Tennessee and the Evil Dead, if you're following along with us. And we're going north. We're coming to the state that I live in, Kentucky, along with Andrew. We're going to a classic. We're going to hit it hard. Our first movie out, Return of the Living Dead in Kentucky. And because you're in this state, I think we should start with Andrew when it comes to Return of the Living Dead. Why don't you go ahead and give us what you got, sir?
Oh, well, so this movie is definitely a movie. It's
definitely a movie. Yep.
It is a movie.
Has scientifically proven.
I think it's a cult fan favorite now. It's rough for me to say cult fan favorite because I'm not in the cult for this movie. It's so there's Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, Romero's, anthology. And then there is this basically this fork in the road when it comes to that storyline where Return of the Living Dead kind of starts. And there's, Return of the Living Dead, the Return of the Living Dead, whatever the second one is. And then there's two more. There's Return of the Living Dead 3, Return of the Living Dead 4 and 4.5. So yeah, they're 4.5 Returning Deads. It is definitely an 80s movie. It is full of bright color, not full of a lot of story. Trying to remember exactly. I think it's related to the first Night of the Living Dead. They played it off as like Night of the Living Dead was a retelling of a real story that was based inside this movie's universe. And they weren't allowed to tell like the full story, but they had like the bodies that were represented in the incident that was the telling of Night of the Living Dead. And that starts kicking off a bunch of 80s dance scenes and a bunch of people eating brains, of course.
Andrew,
Delightfully gory.
I just want to interrupt. I'm sensing from your tone and from your initial reaction, this isn't one of your favorites.
It is not. When you start treading in Romero waters, I get very critical.
Doug is not the most astute host of a podcast for nothing, because that was some great, you just like keyed right in there, Doug. Just
So was this again, not being the big horror guy, I defer to you guys. So was Return of the Living Dead almost supposed to be like an homage to Romero and it fell, or it was just a spoof of it?
It's supposed to be a cash grab of Romero, I believe.
in supposedly like an honorable way, because one of the creators of it was Joe Russo, who was a co-writer, kind of co-creator of Night of the Living Dead with George Romero. And what Andrew alluded to, the fork, when Night of the Living Dead became what it became and Romero went on his way to create his Dead trilogy, Joe Russo, who I'm sure, when you start getting into the muddled history of copyrights and what Night of the Living Dead didn't have, Joe Russo at least did own the idea of the zombies, and having written it with George Romero, and he and Romero had essentially agreed that they were just going to go their separate ways. So Russo creates his own universe in Return of the Living Dead, and he does it with the blessing of Romero, who then does and creates Dawn of the Dead and Day of the Dead. And I believe there was some sort of court settlement or something that was involved there, and I'm not sure about that. But Russo was able to create Return of the Living Dead, which, as Andrew said, is he didn't say the incredible part. I will say that, but it is an incredible 80s movie for the very fact that it does pay homage to Romero and what he was able to do in the 68 Night of the Living Dead, and at the same time take it into a more 80s, I don't know if we want to say hip, that's that's debatable, but definitely a movie that was made for its time. It is a product of its era. There are punks, there is neon, there is punk music, there are mohawks, there are beatboxes. I mean, there are keychains attached to pants. Everything you can imagine from the 80s, it is there. And I don't know, I remember seeing this movie and not connecting it to Night of the Living Dead. I thought it was what Andrew was saying, a cash grab, someone else who just took the idea of zombies and was riffing on it, and was pleasantly surprised to find a movie that, like Evil Dead, which we talked about before, and even American Werewolf in London, teeters on that comedic elements with a little bit of horror. And I think that's what made it more memorable for me, obviously more memorable than it was for Andrew.
So Pete, let me ask you, as a child of the 80s, where that is our formidable years, hearkening back to a previous episode of ours, is The Return of the Living Dead a movie that stands the test of time? Is this something you can watch now and have the same feeling as you did the first time you saw it?
And I thought I was just going to hang out in the back of the van and eat Pringles for the rest of the ride. So I don't know you dragging me into this conversation, but I'm kind of with Andrew. Like I don't quite get. I mean, I guess I do understand the cult fervor for this movie, but I never shared it, and probably because I've only seen bits and pieces of it until recently. I was like, all right, well, let me give it a run through, and I mean, it didn't really do anything for me. Again, I think because again, like Andrew, like I love the original. I mean, Dawn of the Dead is one of my favorite films of all time. Like that had such an impression on me when I first saw it when I was younger. And kind of what I talked about in the previous episode with Evil Dead 2, like at first I was like, I like my horror to like, I like the comedy to kind of just be little asides or things like that. I don't, this one is definitely more satire-ish, and I kind of liked my horror at that time. I liked it more straightforward. So I wasn't really a big fan. It was interesting. I think that I saw Return of the Living Dead 2 in the theater before I even saw this one, and I feel like that didn't matter. Like I almost feel like it was a rehash of the first one. I think like the same actor, like Tom Matthews, not Corey Feldman, Tommy Jarvis from the Friday the 13th series, and the guy that was in that did all the Pathmark commercials when we were growing up. I think they might have been in both.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. That's right on the casting. And I think this is the part that Andrew mentioned before too. They do try to play this off as if Night of the Living Dead is canon, like an actual historical event that happened in the late 60s, because it does start by saying that like the events in this movie are true. The names and the people are real. So it does try to set it up that maybe there were zombies and it was isolated to Pennsylvania, and maybe this was contained. And again, with our rules that there are no spoiler alerts on the Fan2Fan podcast, it even ends in a similar ironic note as in Night of the Living Dead. And obviously being the only fan of this movie on the podcast right now, the fact that, yes, it is very 80s. There is a sense of satire and homage to it, a lot of comedic elements to it. But at the end, in Night of the Living Dead, you get this ironic ending that is a bit of a twist, a bit of a downer, and has a similar thing where outside of a ton of very cool zombies that, they were able to pull off on a very low budget. I mean, some great lines like send more paramedics. Like there's this great line where all these these two paramedics are killed, and the zombies like literally get on the walkie-talkie and actually call to, they just want more snacks. They want more brains. What they were able to pull off with Tarman, this creature that has like, I think they took like aluminum foil and spray painted it and had like KY jelly, what Pete had mentioned, I think in The Beast Within, is of course like the liquid gold of every SFX artist out there, because it just makes everything shiny and organic. So between the comedy, Tarman, and then the ending, they blow up the town with a nuclear bomb. They kill everyone in the town. You gotta get rid of the zombies. The military is responsible for this thing. They try to nip it in the bud, and you do that with a nuke. It's the 80s, of course. It makes complete sense. I don't know. This movie always on Twitter does trend around July because they'll always show the screenshot when the movie occurred, which I want to say was around the 4th of July. So you'll always see, you know, when these fictional events happen in movies or TV shows and things start trending online on social media. This is one of those movies that does that. Again, being the only advocate for this film, I feel like I'm just talking to give it at least a few more seconds of time on the podcast, because Andrew, Pete, you're not doing me any favors here.
I'll give you one thing. The creature effects are really cool. The creature effects are as bright as the neon colors that all the characters are wearing. It really does kind of stand out. And while it's, you know, I wouldn't say like it's in the realm of realism, because I mean the whole movie really just kind of takes realism as a side point. And there are some really cool effects. You know, how do you describe him? The oil man?
The tar man, because he does
man.
come out of this drum.
Yeah.
And the idea is that, and I don't know that they ever say it in the movie. I mean, I saw it a few years ago, but the recollection is that that drum has this safety measure that gets compromised. And it ends up being in the you need a, like the letter U, need a medical supply company. And the cracking of this drum releases a mist that contaminates everything in this medical supply company. So butterflies that are dead and are put on like this pinned on a board start flapping, because the idea is that they're reanimated. And a dog that's used as some sort of like anatomy prop now is coming to life again, because this mist is bringing them all to life. And the idea is that this tar man was somehow captured and put in this drum. And then because it's compromised, he escapes. And the actor that they got to play it must have been the 80s version of Doug Jones. Because when I think of Doug Jones in Ape Sapien and Hellboy and some of the Star Trek work he's done in Discovery, he seems to be a very skinny guy who is, and I'm missing the name here, and I know Pete, Doug, you guys will be able to jump in here, the actor who played C-3PO.
Anthony Daniels.
Thank you. I would imagine they almost come from the same like DNA lineage of like very compact frames that allows FX artists to put a lot of stuff on them and take advantage of that. That's what the actor who played Tarman had, that kind of stature, very lithe, skinny, sinewy build that allowed them to just like stack all the stuff on him that made it look like he was just like literally falling apart.
Yeah, I remember the tar man like dripping flesh, and then there was also like a woman that was dead for a while that's like just half of her, and like her spine's moving around and stuff like that too. And those two effects definitely stand out for the entire movie for me.
And that effect, because of your love. Oh no, we're not done yet, Doug. Because of your love for Tales of the Crypt, Andrew, I think that's probably why that half zombie, you know, and that's kind of a serious part in the movie, because the coroner is asking her and almost like doing like some sort of scientific due diligence to say like, why do you want to eat brains? And she's like, oh, I can feel myself rotting. I want to feel alive again. So they do try to add a little bit of gravitas to a movie that uses KY jelly to make zombies shine. So all things being equal, yes, it is cheesy. It is 80s. But if you haven't seen this, you should watch it. I have no clue why it's connected to the state. There must be something in the movie where they mention that the supply company or the funeral home is in this state. But again, I just think it's a cool movie and worth talking about, because everyone else on the podcast obviously doesn't.
I'm curious about the punk scene in the mid 80s in Kentucky, if that's supposed to take place in Kentucky, because I find that interesting. I'd like to see to know more about that.
And one of the punks, what's his name? Because they have like their names are like Trash, Suicide, just some of the craziest names. And Linnea Quigley, she's the one who dances naked on the gravestone. And I think if there's ever any screenshots of this movie outside of Tarman, it's of her. So what's the name of like the mod punk scene that was in around probably like the 70s? because that aesthetic is definitely represented in the movie, in the mohawks and some of the clothing.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is definitely, I mean, like the UK punk scene was pretty much done by 1980. So it's always interesting to me, like how Hollywood, like you get a lot of like the punk thing going on in the mid 80s, because although there was certainly punk in America with like the Ramones and bands like that, a lot of this, the Mohawk look kind of came later. And I'm going to geek out because I'm a big Sex Pistols fan, and that was very informative on my individuality growing up. So yeah, the Mohawks and like the safety pins through the nose and things, that kind of came along later when it became more of a uniform, and then Hollywood kind of adopted that because obviously it's a very striking look. But to see that shift of it being like 5 years past when punk was like really ascendant, and then showing up as like, well, this is what's happening in middle America, I find that, yeah, it's definitely amusing to see it on screen.
So I jumped on
Hey Doug, hold up. Return of the Living Dead, wherein Bernie is too excited. Pete would rather talk about the 80s British punk scene, and Andrew would just prefer to move on.
Hey, my recommendation, just because I flamed the movie, is I'm not recommending not to see it. You have to have a mixture of good and bad horror movies in your belt.
I feel like with our disparate takes coming here, this is almost like Christopher Nolan's Dunkirk, where like, at some point, all the threads are going to get pulled taut, and it's going to come together, and people are going to be like, this is like the most amazing episode ever. We're going to win whatever the equivalent of podcast Oscars are. We'll get a few of those, and rightfully so, because we're the best.
Yep. Well, to wrap it up, two things just to wrap up your conversation. It actually spread throughout Louisville, Kentucky. That's where it took place. And according to Rotten Tomatoes, you called it a cult film, but cult film, usually the audience score is higher than the professional film critic score, and the professional film critic score is a 91, and the audience was a 79. So this got some high scores. But yeah, we have driven through Kentucky because it's not a big state. So I think we've definitely driven through the entire state talking about this. And we're going to continue north. We're going to head to the neighbor in our tri-state here. We hit Ohio in an earlier episode, and then we kind of backtrack with a wrong turn. So we're going to continue up into Indiana with an American crime. Now, Pete, I'm going to let you kick this one off because we did such a great job with Andrew kicking off the last one. So I know you're going to have just so much more to say about this movie.
Oh, an American crime. Where do I begin? Where do I end? Pretty much in the same place, because I've never heard of this movie. So whatever the crime was, they got away with it.
What was a great cast. You got Catherine Keener, Ellen Page, James Franco, Bradley Whitford. You've got yourself, a really right. It should be a great film, right? Andrew, back me up. Is this a great film?
It's not a terrible film. It's not a horror film. I feel like I feel like this one's reaching for the map. The all-knowing map should know slightly better. There's definitely scenes in there that I would say are unsettling, or the characters definitely, or at least one of the characters goes through a horrific experience. But I don't know. I think this one's kind of grasping at straws to make it like a horror film, or to put it on the horror map.
Okay, so you're debating this one whether it fits into the horror genre.
Yeah, Catherine Keener, Elliot Page, they do a fantastic job in it. And Elliot Page has done stuff in more like thriller horror, like Hard Candy. I think you could make it a sense that that's a horror film. And Elliot Page did great in that. So I don't think it's a lack of anything but just the classification.
Okay. If you want to go horror in Indiana, there's things like Sleepwalkers. I don't know if that is something that jumps to you.
Oh yeah, Sleepwalkers. That's based off the Stephen King, right? It's the cat,
Yes.
the everlasting cat, mom son combo.
Original Stephen King screenplay, just for like most of it was like his books were adapted for the screen. This one he wrote specifically for the screen, and yeah, wow, what a.
So Bernie, let me get your thought before we jump off an American crime, horror, not horror.
I haven't seen it, so I'm with Pete. I have no clue what this movie is. The cast, from what you said, sounds interesting. But Andrew, I'm going to defer to you from what you said. If this is more like Deliverance, where maybe they just needed to fill in the state, so they put something in there, and this is the best they could get. I think, if anything, it feels like this is maybe an insult to Indiana, because the Midwest is filled of, we were talking about how Deliverance, Pete, you'd mentioned, like, there should be some good Southern Gothic horror to have taken the place of Deliverance. And I feel like there probably should be something else better, something that makes sense for the horror slot in Indiana.
Bernie, if you want to defer your time to talk about this to go talk more about Return of the Living Dead, I mean, I'm not telling you how to conduct your podcast. That's just it's a little friendly.
Bring more cops.
And if we expand out to TV shows, Stranger Things takes place in here fictionally.
We did talk about Lovecraft Country in one of the other episodes. So if we're gonna give Lovecraft Country, I forget what we replaced it with, but if we're gonna do that, Stranger Things, hands down.
A new movie came out the last couple of years. Demon House was based in Indiana. I don't know if anybody's seen that.
I missed that one.
Yeah. Okay. So I think Indiana, we're moving on. All right. So moving, we're going to continue north. We're going to hit the Great Lakes. We're going to go to Michigan, and again, I think this one might be a struggle, but we're gonna hit it anyway, because that's what we're committed to here at Fan2Fan. We're going to go with Mr. Jingles. Bernie, do you want to take a crack at launching this one?
Man, the cricket sound effect that I'm going to drop into this episode is going to be used often, because it's going to pop in for this one too. So I don't know what this movie is, to try to not leave my fellow awesome co-host in the lurch. I did go to YouTube to watch the preview, the trailer for Mr. Jingles, just to find that my fat thumbs typed in Mr. Jiggles. And I did see the preview for that, which actually looked like a decent movie. And that seemed closer to like a Paranormal Activity found footage type film. But I have no clue what Mr. Jingles is. So I'm going to defer to Andrew with his horror lineage, that maybe you've seen this one. Maybe you're aware of it.
I tried. I've heard of it before. I think in passing. Like I'm not an aficionado of awful horror movies, but I like to think of myself as a collector. And I cannot find a streamable or physical copy of this movie in order to add to the collection. I feel like I haven't rise to everyone's expectations with this.
If I have to take a stab at the plot, it's I think it's some gentleman goes by the name of Mr. Jingles, a cat lover. Cat runs off somewhere, and he kind of just walks around with his keys jingling and trying to get the cat to come back. I think that, over the course of about 96 minutes.
I think, isn't the cat named Mr. Jingles?
They're both named Mr. Jingles.
There you go. Well, I deferred. I not the horror, least of the horrors out here. Mr. Jingles on Rotten Tomatoes has a 0 reviews by film critics and a 21% audience score. So I think we're okay cruising past the Great Lakes in Michigan.
There is a better one in Michigan. I know you love me taking up as much time as possible.
No, please.
Bernie called it out before. It Follows. It Follows is an incredible horror movie, and I'm pretty sure it takes place in Michigan.
Compared to Mr. Jingles, It Follows must take place in Michigan.
So we're
Mr.
rewriting
Jingles
this map.
should follow It Follows on the hierarchy of Michigan horror movies.
Yeah. Although to be fair, Pete, the movie you were describing reminded me. I'm like, isn't that just like Cat's Eye 2, also a Stephen King vehicle?
Could be.
And
Either way,
Stephen
it sounds
King would
terrifying. So
and Stephen King would play the guy with the keys.
that's right.
All right, well, let's keep growing. We're cruising. We're making some good time here. As we head out of Michigan, we're heading to the cheese state. And we're going to Wisconsin with. Hold on, this one. This is an old one. This is a classic. So I think, Pete, we're going to start with you on this one. The giant spider invasion.
I don't know if I've seen this one or not. I'm doing a quick. Is this the one with Bill Shatner? He was in one of these spider movies.
No, that was the other ant, the other giant insect movie that had ants. This is the one with the skipper from Gilligan's Island.
Oh,
he played
Aaron
Pierre.
Hale's in it. Yeah. Robert Easton, a great character actor. Steve Brody, Barbara Hale is the star. Leslie Parrish. So definitely an older cast.
All right, I'm just reading here the synopsis. After a black hole strikes, it opens up another dimension in a rural Wisconsin town. Right off the bat, I'm like, oh, hello, giant spider invasion. Oh, okay, I think I've seen. Yeah, this has got like the really horrible spider effect, right? Like
it's like the Oscar Mayer Wiener version of the spider.
Yeah, like someone took like some pipe cleaners and like made them like really large and like a to scale giant spider with pipe cleaners and just kind of shoved it up and down the Wisconsin landscape and filmed it for.
Well, this is 1975, and believe it or not, a lower audience score than Mr. Jingles, 15%. Andrew, I'm just going to throw it to you. Otherwise, we're going to continue cruising. What do you think of the giant spider invasion?
I sadly have not seen it. I have no notes for this.
Well, I think I'm finally gonna redeem us, because so far this road trip has not been very advantageous. We really haven't seen any great landmarks. So I think we're gonna have to hit it. We're gonna have to hit it hard.
No, wait, hold on. Can we just like one or two notes about Wisconsin?
Please.
Thank you. So Dawn of the Dead remake was in Wisconsin. It was in a Wisconsin mall, or I guess it takes place in a Wisconsin mall. And I thought that was a very well done remake of it. I think, well, it lost a little bit of the, kind of consumerist undertones that the original had. It was still a delightful horror movie. And surprisingly, I have not been able to find a horror movie about it, but Ed Gein is from Wisconsin, the inspiration for Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So Wisconsin needs to pick up their game.
All right. So you got a little horror in Wisconsin. We'll still keep it on the map, but
I will say, just to say, Doug, let me throw this in there.
Trying to get out of the cheese state.
Well, no, if you've never seen Giant Spider Invasion, then count yourself with the majority of the world's populace. But for those of us that have seen it, we probably saw it because I saw it riffed on Mystery Science Theater 3000. So yes. that is my connection to the movie. It is completely outlandish. Pete, what you were talking about, there's some sort of black hole that opens up, tears a fabric in time, that brings giant spiders into this universe. It's a completely cheesy movie. It's best if it's watch riffed. But to be fair, Andrew, I'm going to defer to you. Those movies, the Dawn of the Dead remake by Zack Snyder, much better movie. This has, it's an older movie. So it's riffing off a lot of, was it them and those giant atomic age insect movies, but made in the 70s. And, I think the cast represents that these are folks that are a little longer in the tooth because they've already had their moment in the acting sun. So was it Patricia Hale, like the secretary in Perry Mason?
Right.
I mean, that's how I remember her name. And I remember the skipper. I mean, just because if you ever watch Mystery Science Theater, there are some interesting shots of the sheriff played by the actor who plays the skipper in Gilligan's Island, and his shirt is just unbuttoned a little too low, and the camera angle is also just a little too close. and they have fun with it. That's the only connection I have with this movie. That's all I have to add to it.
Are you saying that Alan Hale's cleavage made you uncomfortable?
Is his is that his name, Alan Hale?
Yeah, that's the skipper.
Interesting. So wait, is it's Patricia Hale?
Wait a minute, hold on a second. Where am I?
I'm just
Yeah,
wondering.
Barbara Hale.
Barbara Hale. I wonder if
Hale.
they're related.
Can you guys let me get out of Wisconsin, please? We're sputtering. I just filled up the tank. We got a full tank because I know we're going to spend some time in this next state. Bernie, we're going to your home state of Illinois, and the one and only, the third leg of the slasher tent pole, the one and only Halloween. Bernie, I will allow you to kick this one off because it is your home state. Get into it.
This is kind of where do you start with Halloween? I mean, I think Hitchcock's Psycho, which came out maybe in 1960, is argued to be like the beginning of slasher films, and it set that idea up that then John Carpenter took in 1978 when Halloween comes out. And I mean, this episode has been talked about before on the podcast. I'm sure all of us are fans of the movie. The mythology behind it, of course, John Carpenter, who we're big fans of on the podcast. I think that everyone's heard a little bit about it. The only thing I can think of is not having something good to talk about in Indiana outside of Stranger Things. There's something really interesting about the fact that some of these films are almost perfect to take place in the Midwest because they're a byproduct of like the urban sprawl and just the baby boomers after World War II. And, you have community associations and everything's just like blowing up and they're building homes everywhere. And that idea of the sort of like cookie cutter homes and communities that are being built and this sense of like, I don't know, continuity, maybe like some vanilla. And then on top of that, to throw in something like a babysitter killer on top of that. I know it seems kind of interesting because like in other movies we've talked about where the directors are trying to violate those feelings of safety, right? Like a home should be safe. So in Amityville Horror, the fact that there's something possessing Brolin, knows that there's an entity there, or The Exorcist where the family unit, the mother and her daughter, like that should be safe, but then something else is intruding on that. And there's something about that idea of Michael Myers intruding on the idea of what's supposed to be like this suburbia. The people should be okay because we're all in a community and when we're safe and we're all within driving distance of something, but yet because of that, it actually just sets up like a turkey shoot for a serial killer who could stay in the same community, in the same block, in the same area, and actually like in Michael Myers' case, like just do a lot of harm.
Yeah, it was great for that because he's just able to like blend, and especially that it's like during Halloween and he has his mask on, but he's just blending into all these things and adds this layer of foreboding in the atmosphere that that everyone has their guard down, everyone's accessible to him, and you see him out of the corner of your eye, or you see something that's just not right that you think is from him entering the house or getting into position to strike. And it's just this sense of uneasiness because you kind of project onto yourself of feeling in that state of vulnerability, just not really having a worry towards danger around you, and being in those vulnerable situations. It really is something that, especially for the time, was really something you could only kind of correlate to the suburbs in the Midwest.
And I think, the simple fact of calling the character the Shape, kind of gave it this otherness. I think when you finally hit the closing credits after that roller coaster ride of a film, it's like, it's like Michael Myers, age 5, Michael, age 21, two different actors, obviously. But then the Shape is, there's like three actors listed for one character essentially. And, you know, although he's referred to as Michael, I've always found it interesting that Carpenter, you know, essentially refers to him as the shape, you know, in talking about it. And again, I think that just speaks to that otherness, you know, that rise of, yeah, like you guys are talking about, the safety of the 70s. Like suburbia was supposed to be this idyllic American dream of like, oh, community and everyone's together and this is all good and great. But then you also got the rise of stranger danger after this, and perfectly embodied by, you know, the visage of that William Shatner mask.
Now I have to just ask this real quick, Doug. I got to wonder, because we all love this movie, and there's, you know, all the trivia that talk about the Shape Pete and like the Shatner mask, and you know, it's in Haddonfield, Illinois, but you can see palm trees and there's California license plates. So by virtue of the credits, you know, the shot, it says Illinois, but we know it's in California, somewhere on the West Coast. I'm just wondering with you guys, like, how did you guys see this? Like, do you remember the first time you saw this, or maybe the first time it made an impression on you?
For me, I'll be honest, I saw it because of Jamie Lee Curtis. I as not the mega horror fan that you guys are, I'm, you know, I always knew about the movie. I saw it older. I saw it in my 20s. I was not drawn to it when I was younger. It wasn't a genre that I ever cared about growing up. So I saw it when I was in my 20s in the 90s, and it was because of Jamie Lee Curtis, because I've been a monster fan of hers ever since, for me, Trading Places. So that's what drew me in, and seeing this young Jamie Lee, and her immediate chops, because she just had it. The scream. I've always been a fan of hers, so that's what drew me into it.
I think that's pretty cool, because I think, you know, certainly those of us that are more fans of the genre, like everyone's got their touch points, and we'll probably talk about them in a second, but I think that's just very interesting, your, you know, entry point to this iconic movie to come so later in life. So, I mean, aside from the Jamie Lee Curtis standpoint, what did you think overall of, you know, having all those years of the buildup of like, oh, this is like a classic of the genre? Like, what did you think overall of the film?
I like the storyline. I mean, the demented aspect of this little 7-year-old, this little kid killing his sister, and then they just put him away and threw away the key. And the fact that the damage that did to him when he got out, and that he held on to that for so long and was never able to let it go. I love the underlying story. I like the fact that they just wanted to forget about this and have this whole entire situation go away, and they didn't bother to try to fix it, you know? So that's what I liked about it. And then, you know, it was a cool slasher movie. It was fun. It was a fun movie. I think it was a fun movie. I didn't get scared. I didn't have any jumps. I was too old for that. But I enjoyed it. Andrew, what about you? What brought it to you?
I saw it on cable like in October when I was fairly young. The TV had wood paneling, and like it helps narrow down the decade. And I remember really just kind of getting sucked into it. Like I think I missed the very beginning of it. So, you know, all the, you know, child Michael Myers. I think I missed all of that, and then, you know, it was just like him kind of stalking or standing still right outside of like a house or something. And there's, you know, it's just this. I think there's this shot in the beginning where he's like on the sidewalk or on the street, and it just kind of has him completely still. And I remember, I think that's where I started with it. And that just kind of locked me to the TV for a while. And like, but watching that movie in like a 4x3, you know, like 20-some inch TV on basic cable really doesn't do the cinematography justice, but it really just, it hooked me then. And, you know, I've always revisited it time over time.
Yeah, for me, I saw this pretty young. This was one of those, I come from a big family on my dad's side, one of 29 cousins. And at the time, there weren't that many cousins yet, but my older cousins were always inflicting, you know, torture, trauma on us younger cousins, and so they loved the fact like, oh, we're going to scare the shit out of Pete and my brother Brian. And so I remember being over. I had there were 4 brothers, my Aunt Marie and Uncle Warren, Chris, Peter, and Stephen, and we went over their house on Halloween. And even this had to be very early 80s. Even by the early 80s, like Halloween, showing Halloween on Halloween was the thing. And they're like, oh, we've got something, for you guys tonight. And so I guess I was probably 9 years old at the time. And like, we're going to watch Halloween. I'm like, great, another Halloween show, thinking like, this is going to be, like Fat
Charlie
Albert
Brown.
Halloween or something like that, or a Great Pumpkin. And it was anything but. And, but obviously, just absolutely terrified at that young age, but, mesmerized at the same time, just because, I think a movie like Halloween, there's something primal that's going to grab even a young kid. And obviously it's one of the things that fueled my love for wanting to and seeking out being scared as I grew up, which is an odd thing to want, but
Well, that is the thing. It's that thrill-seeking aspect of it, where you're going to get scared doing this, but yet you have to, because that you love that adrenaline rush. So let me ask you, Pete, were you a looking through the fingers or head under a blanket kind of scared kid?
Yeah, usually under the blanket, if there's a pillow, pillow over the face, not to the point of suffocation, because that sounded odd when I first said it, but just to hide the eyes. Same cousins would take me to the drive-in in upstate New York to see rated R movies, and I'd be like literally hunkered in the back of a station wagon, just like, obviously I could hear everything, but I didn't want to see what was happening on screen, which actually made it even worse, because when your imagination starts going, you're like, oh my God, what is even happening right now? So yeah, that was me.
Bernie, what was your first experience with Halloween?
Like Andrew, I saw it on TV. We didn't have cable growing up, but I did see it on WGN, which was local to the Chicagoland area, and they would also air it around Halloween week. Except my first time seeing it, like I was exposed to like 2 and 3 at the same time. So it was pretty neat, because if I remember right, on Monday they aired Halloween, Tuesday Halloween 2, Wednesday Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, and then the Thursday that was Halloween, they re-aired Halloween at prime time at like 7 p.m. And like Andrew said, same thing, like it doesn't do it justice to see it on TV, 4:3 ratio with very little editing, but at the same time, there's not that much gore in it. And I think I was reminded of that because I've only ever seen this in the theater once. And we've talked about how Exorcist was reissued. Jaws has been in the theater a few times. Movies like Star Wars, obviously, that aren't horror related, but classic movies that get reissued. Halloween gets released in theaters. I saw it for the first time a few years ago with my wife, and that was the first time she'd seen the movie, period. So she's not necessarily, a willing horror fan. She'll see those crossover movies like The Exorcist or Sixth Sense. So dragging her to take Halloween felt like dragging her, and I had to do the occasional, the checking, looking over just to see if she was completely devoid of emotion, and our marriage was going to be on the rocks on the drive home, or if she was also like, I didn't want her to be uncomfortably frightened from the movie. But then, movie's done. I'm like, what do you think? She's like, oh, that wasn't as bad as I thought. So I think there's something about the movie that actually surprises you now, because I think today's audiences, having seen the reboot of Halloween or movies like Saw or Hostel, or to be fair, any other slasher film that is a little bit more graphic, has a bit more gore, this Halloween may feel tame. But if you take that piece out of the conversation, the cinematography, the composition, the pacing, the music, the acting, it's all there. I mean, there's a reason why I think it's held up as such a classic. And while I don't know, Doug, like when we were talking last episode about how, you're not necessarily the biggest horror fan, but those crossover movies you're aware of too, like my wife, I don't know if I would put Halloween, like it's definitely on the Mount Rushmore. Like you said, it's one of the 10 poles with Freddy and Jason, but I don't know. There's something about Halloween that I think would actually be a pleasant surprise to people who may not gravitate gravitate to horror to just watch it and realize that it's actually just a good thriller. It's a good movie.
Yeah. So all right. So let me ask you. I referenced her earlier, Jamie Lee. When we talk about, Bernie, as you brought up The Last Girl, is Janet Leigh the first of those in slasher films, or is Jamie Lee the grandmother of that character? Is she the one that just kind of set that off?
I don't know. I would think that just based on the sequence of events, her mom is technically the first girl, because not to ruin Psycho for anyone, but it doesn't make it very long in the movie. So the trope of the final girl, Jamie Lee Curtis, is definitely that. I mean, that's been in so many movies that it's kind of hard to kind of connect the dots to see where it began. But I don't think it was her mom in Psycho, but Jamie Lee Curtis has to be close to one of the original, for sure, Scream Queens and one of the original final girls.
So on a Mount Rushmore of Scream Queens, Jamie Lee is right there. She's first one chiseled in.
I would say so. Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, I mean, she made a couple of movies in the late 70s, early 80s that kind of cemented that until she was able to break out. I don't know if it was A Fish Called Wanda or which one, but that, when she finally got more of the dramatic roles. But I mean, she did Halloween, Terror Train, Prom Night. She did a bunch of
The Fog. Yeah.
The Fog, which is another favorite of mine. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I think it was Trading Places that really kind of broke her out. That everybody saw.
Places. Yeah.
She could kind of go a different direction, a comedic direction, which was, fantastic. So, all right. Anybody have anything else on Halloween? I know it's a big one, and I think we've definitely redeemed ourselves on this road trip so far.
I got two.
Andrew, you got something?
So Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, is perfectly made for cable, like 4x3 wood box panel TV. It's a guilty pleasure of mine to watch that every now and then. I watched it last Halloween, just because it's nice that it's the only one that breaks away from Michael Myers, and it breaks like hard. Just it's a different story. I think that they were trying to make the whole series an anthology, right? And then they double backed. But it's a fun like conspiracy play.
And it is a perfect 80s cable movie. I mean, the idea of like bringing the Scottish mysticism and Stonehenge and still having it take place on Halloween. I think the movie, was it Trick or Treat, where that was definitely like an mini episodes within this larger anthology where everything was happening on the same night. If you're John Carpenter and you see the popularity, let alone the box office popularity of Halloween 1, when the producers come to you and say, hey, let's do number 2. And I think he said in interviews where he's like, I think there's nothing else to say about this movie. I don't know what else to do with this. So he didn't come back to direct that. But I think his heart was probably in being able to experiment, to do things more like Season of the Witch, to have fun with it. And, while I think he's maintained producer credit and obviously contributed heavily in the score, because that, regardless of the fork that it took for Halloween 3, the other movies have maintained his music and some of the style and, modernized it a bit. But I think, to be fair, that was probably more his original vision. Let's do some interesting supernatural, not supernatural things with the idea of Halloween, do it every year. And, just basically like you can count on cashing a check at the box office, because it's a perfect time to go to the theater and want to be scared.
And Bernie, speaking of score, I mean, if you want just perfect encapsulation of like 80s synthwave cinema score, Halloween 3 might be my favorite John Carpenter. I mean, I know Halloween is just classic, but the score for Halloween 3 is flat out fantastic. I absolutely love it. And you also, as a side bonus, you get peak Tom Atkins in Halloween 3. So, I mean, it's totally a guilty pleasure. It's not a great movie by most stretches, but it is so watchable anytime.
He is the best, like barrel-chested 80s non-hero, and his
alcoholic doctor.
He's so good, and I think this is where we're moving away from Halloween, but it's just so good what this first one set up. Halloween 3 only exists because Halloween 1 is able to do what it does. Same with Halloween 2, where, all being fair, like, I know Halloween 2 doesn't get a lot of credit, but it's actually a solid movie. And I think the fact that it takes place 15 minutes after the events of the first one was probably a stroke of genius, because they could have either continued the exploits of Michael Myers and done something else, or maybe even done a prequel and gone to his time in the asylum or something. But the fact that Halloween 1 does such a good job, it actually gives us everything else.
So let me ask you guys again, not being the mega horror, with Halloween, I know there's been many iterations, Jason and Freddy and all that stuff, but with the main character, with Jamie Lee Curtis's character, she was in Halloween 2, but then she was gone and she was brought back in, what was it, H2O? So the 20th anniversary, right? So what are your thoughts? Did it hold up to the hype? Because that, as a non-horror fan, as a non-massive Halloween fan, I was excited for that, because 20 years later, it was a cool thing. Bring her back and get her back to where she started from. Did it live up to the hype? Dead silence is telling me everything.
For me, I had much higher expectations for it. Really, like, bringing her back was really smart, and like, it can be done well. We can see with the recent Halloween movies how she came back for H2O, but now they kind of redone that, and she's back now, but H2O is not part of that storyline.
So they just kind of forgot about that one, said, okay, we're gonna throw that one away, and just kind of
all of them away except the first one. Yeah.
Basically, yeah.
Nice. All right. So
wait. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I know you want to get out of Illinois.
No. Please. This is your...
I think there's an honorable mention in Illinois, and that's Child's Play, which takes place in Chicago.
Chucky compared to Michael, I think Michael wins. But But what Brad Dourif does, I got to tell you, that's a good one, because we talked about how if the tentpole is Michael, Freddy, Jason, Chucky, I don't know. I don't know that he's number 4. When we talked about Pumpkinhead, if there's a lineup, Chucky is before Pumpkinhead, but I couldn't tell you who the number 4, who our cleanup batter is. I don't know who that is.
What about Pinhead? Does he fall in there?
He's definitely an honorable mention. So if we're sticking to Illinois, Michael wins, but Chucky and everything. I mean, talk about Chucky, Cult of Chucky, and the upcoming TV series. They only exist if the first Chucky does what it's supposed to do, just like what John Carpenter did with Halloween. So both of them, like, if there's a 1A and 1B, that for sure, absolutely, Chucky gets number 2.
Checked.
Let's continue our road trip, but I'm going to give you guys a little control on the directions, because I could go either way. We can go southwest or northwest. Bernie, where do you want to go? You want to go southwest, or you want to go northwest?
I think let's go northwest, because this after having spent a lot of time talking about Halloween, deservedly so, probably having talked too much about Return of the Living Dead, that's arguable. We might get out of the next state a little faster.
We can hop into the Fan2Fan helicopter.
Yeah.
All right. So we did. So the Batcopter came down, picked us up with our shark repellent, and dropped us into Minnesota for a hot second, where we got to take a look at Jennifer's body. Pete, do you want to take a look at Jennifer's body for us and tell us what you think?
I have not seen Jennifer's body, but funny enough, I actually hear good things about this. It's supposedly an excellent Megan Fox performance, so I would like to check it out at some point.
Does that phrase exist normally?
I think it does. I think
An excellent Megan Fox performance.
Didn't she
I
win
don't know that
Oscars for Transformers?
I feel
You're
like Megan
thinking
Fox has
Teenage
gotten a
Mutant Ninja
bad
Turtles
rap
are
because
completely different.
you know, probably because of Michael Bay. So yeah, I mean that's what I hear. I'm curious to check this out at some point, but other than that, I don't really have much to say about it because I have not seen it.
Again, Jennifer's Body, another good cast. I mean, yeah, you got Megan Fox as a star, you got Amanda Seyfried, you got Adam Brody, J.K. Simmons, one of the greatest character actors of all time, Amy Sedaris. So cast-wise, it's got a stellar cast. Bernie, what do you have on Jennifer's Body?
Pete, I'm with you. I've never seen this movie, and so Andrew, it's gonna get sorry, you're gonna have to do the lion's share of the work here on this one. But the only thing I know about this movie is that, if I'm right, Diablo Cody, who had her original kind of like coming out party with the movie, he's in Arrested Development, and do you guys know the movie I'm talking about?
Diablo Cody, Juno.
Juno, Thank you. She'd written Juno.
Yep.
And I want to say this was her follow-up to Juno, where she talk about taking a left turn. You know, she delved into the horror comedy. From what I remember in the trailer, it's a bit funny. It's a bit of a satire genre, and that's, I think, probably why the success of Juno, as kind of like an indie success, allowed her to make her passion project in Jennifer's Body. That's as much as I know about it, outside of seeing a trailer when it first was released. So Andrew, I try to tee it up as much as possible to give it all up to you, because I feel like you've seen this movie.
Bring it home, Andrew.
I have seen this movie only because it was homework for this map. For some reason, I kept pushing it off of actually getting to watch it. And I was like, all right, this is the best time. It's something that I'm contractually required to do, so I might as well watch it.
Were we required to do research for this?
Knowing that,
fair, I do need to point out that I'm sorry. I do have to point out Andrew was the only one of us that sought out the new daughter and was able to explain that plot to us. So there is something either admirable about what you've done, Andrew, or incredibly terrible and beyond description. So I'm glad that you assigned yourself homework, and seems like you completed it.
Yeah, for the most part. It's interesting to note this follows Juno in the it's because I'm not knowing that now, I can see some similarities with the storytelling between the two, which I think is really interesting. It is kind of, a little outlandish, a little bit of a parody of stuff, but it has some I wouldn't say novel things, but it has some interesting approaches in which it kind of rolls with the pieces that it has. And the cast did surprise me. I did not expect to recognize as many faces as I did in that movie. I mean, all in all, it's a good one. Like, if you're trying to put together a Halloween playlist of demonic movies, I'd definitely throw this one on top of the pile. It's not doing anyone any harm. It's fairly quick. There's not really too much complexity to it. Popcorn type of horror movie. Definitely, more for a younger kind of teenage audience. There's, some of those tropes in the teenage kind of get the teenagers to the theater to watch the horror movie type of things. But I think it carries it well.
So when I was going to say, when Diablo Cody first became popular, while she didn't have necessarily like the accolades that Quentin Tarantino did as a writer and director, but if I'm going to assign this to her, like if she was like a female Quentin Tarantino, and the dots I'm trying to connect is in Tarantino, you can see the DNA of his influences in his movies, in Kung Fu films, Black exploitation, like that's all ingrained in his movies. I'm wondering, Andrew, since you saw this, is there anything of that? Because I'm imagining Diablo Cody as someone who's probably grown up on John Hughes movies and probably John Carpenter movies, so that there are probably nods to the genre. And since you're familiar with a lot of horror movies, did you see anything like that?
Ooh, I mean, like there's a nice like story element of Satanism like gets carried through it. That's pretty good. Like, they Amanda goes to the school's occult section of the library in order to try to figure out what's going on with her best friend. So there's a good part of that. The style of it too. Like if you shorten it up a little bit and maybe punched up the campiness a little bit more, it could have been like kind of the grindhouse kind of aesthetic that Quentin Tarantino did with Roth, and kind of fit inside that vein. I think they pulled a little bit of campiness down, gave a little bit more depth to the teenage characters, and then definitely went a little bit higher budget with some of their effects. I don't think necessarily for the benefit of the effects, but it is what it is.
Someone gave her money, said, you did real well with this Juno movie, so here's a whole bunch of money, make it awesome. And to follow up, I mean, Diablo Cody, you definitely see a trend when you think about her movies. You had Juno, Jennifer's Body, and then you had Young Adult with Charlize Theron. So she's straddling that line between the comedy and drama. She threw a little horror in there in the middle, but she's trying to capture an audience. She definitely is going after that young adult audience with her path. So again, Jennifer's Body, you go to the second row, Chris Pratt was in this, Cynthia Stevenson was in this. The cast alone, you absolutely should have loved this movie, and not a lot of people did. Anything else when it comes to Jennifer's Body?
I think when you read the description of the body, when you read the description of the movie, and kind of just see it's hot billing, it might scare you away from it. I think that's what kept me from watching it for all this time, because it's been on streaming services for quite some time, definitely easily accessible, and it's worth jumping in. It's gory, but it's worth jumping in. Just kind of check any of your expectations at the door, just and know going in that it's not necessarily the best horror movie you're ever going to see, but it's fun.
All right, so we got our RV repaired. That's why we had to take the back copper to Minnesota. We're gonna head back down to Iowa to the Crazies. Did you guys have any last things that you want to say about the Crazies, or do you really want to get into it? Where are we with that? Are we moving right along?
Oh, I think we got thoughts, Andrew.
I'm not sure how everyone's going to take this. I've only seen the remake and not the original.
To be that same with me. I saw the original early on.
Yeah.
But it's George Romero directs Night of the Living Dead in 1968. He makes the Crazies in 1973. I don't know if that's the movie he makes right after that. I feel like Dawn is made sometime later in the 1970s, maybe like 1976 or something like that. So I don't know if Monkey Shines or Martin, we're somewhere in between there if we're gonna celebrate Romero's entire catalog. But I remember watching it because it was Romero and I wanted to see more of what he's done. But like Andrew, like the Crazies, the one with Timothy Oliphant, or if you're a Kevin Smith fan, Timothy Olyphantastic. If you've seen any of the Kevin Smith stand-ups, I saw that one, and I think hearkening back to the reference we made earlier about Dawn of the Dead, the remake by Zack Snyder, the Crazies feels like it's taking that concept of zombies from the 60s and 70s and modernizing it in a more dire setting, because it is about, again, like a town that's kind of taken over by this faceless military and this virus that takes over these folks. And this one is more zombie adjacent, I think, than necessarily zombie, gory zombie specific, but that idea of like a plague, a virus, something that we're more familiar now than ever before, but that idea that there's some sort of contamination that can only be contained by the government. In movies like Outbreak, the idea that sometimes the government, the faceless entity, becomes dangerous, if not more dangerous than the virus itself. We've talked about Stephen King, The Stand, similar ideas where we see human nature along with all these other pieces of society.
Yeah, and
I've seen both. I really like the Romero one a lot. It's, there's something about it. Again, I think it's probably related to when I first saw it. I kind of stumbled upon it midway on TV one day. It was like one of those afternoon movies that was on, and just seeing like these guys running around in the woods with like the white hazmat suits on, just from an aesthetic standpoint, was very striking, because you've got like, like the very kind of muddled, forest thing going on in there, and they're in a gunfight with these people. And, I was too young to really understand what the movie was about at that point. I just saw people shooting at each other. But when I saw it, when I got a little bit older, I think the remake is good for what it is. But what I think I like about the Romero original is that it's like small town. It's the government coming in and like you're saying, Bernie, like taking control. Like, we're going to handle this. The townsfolk not really knowing what's going on. And of course, there's probably something going on underneath the surface. Is the government telling the truth? Are they being upfront and transparent about what's happening? And it has like this very small town, because it takes place in a small town, but it has a very small feel to it. Like, you feel like it's just very kind of claustrophobic, even though it's like this rural, there's all this open space, but like everything happening is like in this tiny little part of the United States. And then there's just, there's some good acting to it towards the end. There's just a heartbreaking scene with the main character and his girlfriend, and they're on the run from the government, and like the virus is infecting people. They go crazy, and he's like hiding out with her in some kind of construction area, and like hides her in like this cement thing, and she starts to exhibit the side effects of the virus, and he's like completely breaking up, because he realizes what's happening, and he has to leave her there because he's trying to draw the people away from her. But at the same time, like he knows like it's only a matter of time until his girlfriend is just going to be like she's gone. And so I was always kind of struck by that one specific scene. So there's something about that original that I really like.
Andrew?
Oh yeah, this is my time to talk. Yeah, I like that aspect of the story where it's not just this unstoppable wave of zombies, but it's also this government presence. And so there's like these two waves that are definitely, they have different different objectives, different pacings to them. One slowly starts to overlap the other, and it just it gives you that sense of just constantly, the pace is always fast, because they're constantly having to move, constantly having to adapt to these new circumstances. I remember seeing that, at least for the remake, and that felt really refreshing. That, and it gets the same. Does the original have the same happy ending that Return of the Living Dead gets?
It's got that. It's that early 70s nihilism coming through, certainly from Romero, known for. So yeah, they're unsparingly not taking a good not a positive outlook to the government in the early 70s and trust in government.
They do take the nuclear option.
They do, huh? So I guess as we evolved as a race, something like Outbreak, where they actually stop the bomb from dropping. This one didn't quite go that route, huh? They just pushed the button and off it went. Well,
and I can't remember the remake, but in the original, there's a scene. There's a doctor, like he's like scrambling to find a cure for this virus that's infecting everyone, and he actually comes up with it. But as he comes up with it, the people that have all been kind of like hoarded into, I can't remember if it was a high school or whatever, they start stampeding because shit's going down and everything's going to hell, and he basically gets trampled to death, and like the cure is shattered and spread out all over the floor. So it's like, again, it's one of those, you're watching it and you're like, all right, this guy, he's going to come and save the day, and then nope, that's not happening. So all that work as he's doing throughout the film is like come to this point, and then it's all gone. It's and you feel that loss, because he's the only one that has done this, and so it's like they're back to square one.
It's such a wonderful flourish. Yeah, the remake doesn't have that. It's fairly. I remember the remake being fairly linear with the approach. Not a lot of beside storytelling with that. It's just really following the main grouping of characters throughout.
All right, so as we drop the bomb on this episode of Fan2Fan Podcast, thank you. I worked on that one for quite a while.
Nice.
We're gonna pull over to the side of the road and get some rest in our RV. Andrew is cooking some stuff up on the stovetop, and we will be back to continue this road trip on another episode of Fan2Fan Podcast. And don't worry, because you're next. That's where we're headed. So buckle up, and we'll see you next time on Fan2Fan Podcast.